Okay. This week is a very big yard site. It's just not today. It's the yard site of the Taz. We'll cover that at the end of the week. But if I'm not mistaken, I read in the Vasanayas that Rav Lipa Margulis was nifter, and he was the Rosh Hashiva of Torah Tamima. And in the write-up, it's very interesting that they included turbulence that he had in his life. We all know that Torah Tamima dealt with $100 million lawsuit for things that used to be swept under the rug that now are hitting the limelight. So they actually addressed it in his obituary, which was very interesting. Okay. Ayin Chum. So yesterday we learned at the bottom of Tosis, which was really very machmer regarding the halachas of Davar Ovid. He said if you have product to sell, even if you could sell it for a better price today than you could sell it for after Chalamoid, if you're going to still sell it, not at a loss, which means for at least as much as you bought it for, it's not considered a Davar Ovid. You're surely not allowed to go buy something on sale because you're gonna get a better deal on it. Now that is very much a matter of dispute amongst the Rishonim, and a lot of people pass not like that. Like Moshe Paskins, if you come to a city, your children come from Lakewood to Toronto, and there's products that are available here that are not available anywhere else, you're avada allowed to buy them there. That's considered a davar ovid. So the choices that we learned is very machmer compared to what the halacha l'maisa is. There's a lot of shittas who hold that if there's a special deal to be bought on Chalamoid, that you are allowed to buy it. So we can't pass it just because we learned the Gemara and the Taisus. We always have to ask shilas, especially if the Gemara that we learn is going to be too machmer. So we don't want to rely on that. We want to make sure to get the halacha l'maisa. So let's see the Heilig Gemara. So the Gemara wants to compare saving a davar ovid to when you're allowed to show some deference to goyish courts. Tanya Nami Gabi Avodah Zarah Kehagavra. So at the bottom line on Daf Yud Amud Beis, we learned a similar concept when it comes to Avodah Zarah, and it says in the Brisa, Hoyochin li Yerid Shalakum. You're allowed to go to a Yerid of the Goyim, and Rashi says that's called a Yom Shukah. It's a sale that they make before their Avodah Zarah. So, for instance, a Pri Kratzmich sale would be I'm not saying would be halachically the same as this. I'm just using it as an example. You can buy from the many wares that they might have for sale. Not only that, you're allowed to register your ownership of what you purchased in the Goyish registration system. Because it's saving yourself from them. So there's different pshatim in exactly what it is that the kula here is saying, A, and B, what the reason for it is. So let's first look at what Rashi says. Rashi says, oh, thank you very much, Shanti. Thank you. Gewaltig, this is tactical. It's not too strong for me. So Rashi seems to say that there's no problem of buying there. The whole problem is using their secular courts to register your ownership. And Rashi says why? The kiva the hashtahu, the mashkachlahu, since they're here now and they're able to verify to you, that's where the atzuli yodin is. But there are those who learn the whole shayla is b'chalal if you're allowed to even buy from such a yerid. And the first say, of course, as long as there's no taxes that are going to avoid the Zorah, and just because it's a good deal, you're allowed to participate and buy from this good deal, because if they should go out from Yodin, it doesn't literally mean you're saving from them. It means because you have an opportunity to unload the merchandise from the goyim at a good price. If you have an opportunity to buy wholesale, you don't want to let a goy get that opportunity. You want to take advantage of that opportunity to buy low. Now, interesting enough, why is it called a Yerid Shalakim? By a Jewish marketplace, It's called Yom Deshuka, like Rashi says right at the top of the Amud. But by God, it's called a Yurid Shalakim. And unfortunately, the reason it's called a Yurid, because when Goyim get together for a trade show, they fall. In other words, they do all mice and meals. People are traveling on business. Goyim, when they get together, like you go to these electronic shows in Vegas and all these Yurid Shalakim, when Goyim go away for business, what they do at night, the Averis that they do at night, the partying when they're away is disgusting. I once had to go on a trip, a semi-business trip. It was like our vendors would want to take us to their manufacturing plant so we could see how their products are made. So basically, I spent 2 or 3 days in a bus with Goyim going around touring different plants. And I could tell you firsthand that people who seem so civilized and proper and respectful in a regular day-to-day business setting, when they're on a Yerid, they're Yarden below Yarden. It was so bad that I actually got an apology letter from the manufacturer for the behavior of the people on the trip. Rav Shara l'chia bar Ashi l'migdal uhari b'chayil d'mayada. Rav allowed Chia bar Ashi to make a net, to actually build a net, make a net that they would catch fish with on Cholamoid. My time in Maisa Hedjit too, because it's a Maisa Hedjit. And since it's a Maisa Hedjit, you're allowed to do it on Cholamoid. Of course, it's to catch fish for Yom Tov. Aval Isli Aser. But Isli is Aser. Isli is Reshtosh, it's sudden by Oifos. It's nets that are designed to capture birds. That would be also to make a Cholamoid. My time in Maisa Omanu, because that's a Maisa Oman. So you might ask, it's L'tzorich Moed. So if it's L'tzorich Moed, why can't you do it? And it's not only L'tzorich Moed, it's a hechsher for achila. You got to cook on Yom Tov. You got to prepare food on Yom Tov. So isn't this making the net a preparation to catch birds to have food on Yom Tov? The morning shmiyah. So the Mefarshim answer you see from here, the Magen Avram says that even though for the wide path, I had enough of it this morning. Because I walked the shul today. I walked through the path. We have to mention Yosy Mitzvah. Chaim Tzvi and Shlomi Feintuch last night shoveled out the entire path between the house, between the shul and the Rav's house, so the Rav shouldn't have to go foot in front of foot. What's it called? To walk with his feet one in front of the other and balance himself on the way here. So they made a beautiful wide path from the Rav's house to the Bismedrash. Anyway, so the Dr. Magen Avram, even though Hechsher Echal Nefesh is allowed, the Hechsher is not allowed. And making a net to catch a bird is too far removed from the preparation of the food, and that would not be allowed. Rabbi Yehuda Shara, Ami Tanura, Ami the oven man. There's like the Michelin man we have nowadays, so they had the oven man. So Ami the oven man, he was a manufacturer of ovens, and he allowed him Lemigdal Tanura. He allowed him to build ovens on Cholamoid. He also allowed Rabba bar Asbi Lemigdal Mahulta, and he allowed Rabba. He was the sifter man, and he used to manufacture sifters. He allowed him to do that. And is that so? Vatani Rabba bar Shmuel b'shavin she'ein goydlin tanu lechatchila. Didn't we learn that everybody's moida that you're not allowed to build ovens on Cholamoid? This is talking about Cholamoid that's b'yoyim Chama, which would be Cholamoid Pesach, where since it's dry and warm outside, things dry quickly and cure quickly, and therefore the oven that would be manufactured on Cholamoid would be ready early enough to be able to be used on Yom Tov itself, and therefore it's tzorich Yom Tov. Can't be Moshe Shamim, but Cholamoid Sukkos, when you were coming into the cold weather and it's wet, it's a wet, cold season, that oven won't dry and harden so fast, and it won't be usable on Yom Tov, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to make it on Cholamoid. Zok Tehillah Gemara Baiter, with some interesting things coming up.
It's not unusual that the average people would be mentioned in the Gemara. These people must have been, somewhat on a higher level.
Isn't it mentioned that anybody who's mentioned in the Gemara could make Tchis HaMesim?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go that far that Ami the oven man could have done Tchis HaMesim, but it's still unusual that he should be mentioned by name. And he might have been a big man.
Yep, indeed. Oysa Maka Lagag, you're allowed to make a Micah, a gate around your roof, Ulumur Peset, Maisa Hedjit. Only a Maisa Hedjit of a loy Maisa, not professional. So the question is, are we talking here about a Micah Shal Mitzvah, or are we talking about a regular Micah? So let's see what Rashi says. I don't think Rashi is clear. Rashi is Kozel Katana, Ha'oisin ala Itztabois, Shalafnei Ha'aliyas Kedolos. They make small walls around these benches that are in front of these aliyos. So I don't know exactly what this is, but a bench is never so high that there'd be any danger of falling off. So I'm not sure if this is the halachic requirement to make a Micah. And then Rashi says, which I'm sorry, but look at Rashi says it. Ke'en sheyesh al svas nar rhymes. Rashi was speaking to the Frenchman, like the gates you see along the edge of the Rhine River. I don't know what those gates look like, but I'm assuming that they're guardrails. So it's a type of guardrail. There's a big shaila in the Mefarshim if this Mishnah is referring to the Micah. That's a guy. The Micah that's a halachic ma'aseh that you have to make around your roof, or if it just means a privacy screen, and it's not something that's a mitzvah. Because there are those who learn that if it's a Micah or mitzvah, avada you're allowed to make it. So the shaila here is only a personal privacy screen. That's a shaila if you're allowed to make it ma'aseh. But if it's a guardrail that you're mechuyev to make, then avada you'd be allowed to do it on Chalamoid. But there's a muridik akasha here from one of the achronim, and he asks, if we're talking about a guardrail of mitzvah, so then what's the shaila? It's a dover ovid. If you're allowed to go buy schoyer that's cheaper on Chalamoid, you're for sure allowed to put something up that's going to save someone's life. If there's a clear and present danger, as it's referred to in the Goyish world, if there's a clear and present danger right here, so a Micah is for sure a dover ovid. So they bring a raya from here that the chiyuv to make a Micah is not only when there's a clear and present danger, even if there's plenty of protection and it's a beit chashash where nobody even goes up to that roof, so there's such a little chance of any type of damage or anyone getting hurt, the chiyuv to build a Micah is there anyway. And that's why this, if you learn that this Micah is as a halachic ma'aseh you have to make, it's lav dafka davar ovid, because it could be the chiyuv to build a Micah is not only when there's an imminent danger here, but you have to make a Micah even if it's a remote chance that someone could fall off the roof.
I once went on somebody's private house who had a flat roof, and he's gone already, he's not alive anymore, but I saw the remnants of his Micah that he decided to make on his own.
So how did it fall off?
It fell in disrepair after many, many years, but I still saw it. Gilbert, do you know that fellow? Gilbert, do you know that fellow?
No, I don't know who you're talking about.
You don't know who I'm talking about? He had a flat roof. He's not alive anymore, but he decided to make his own Micah on his flat roof. He actually lived on Dumbling.
You talking about my father?
Yeah.
I've never been on the roof. Sorry.
Okay. I thought you knew about it.
So when Mr. Zolti all of a sudden talk about his Michael, he meant his Michael on the roof.
Yeah, he made that Michael on the roof.
Wow. Okay, gewaltig. So als een Michael agagel met pesten maar headed abloy my son. Schaffen as a stocking. If there's cracks in a tanner, Rashi says, you're allowed to smear the cracks with a shmirechts to seal them. Umagila noisa, and you're allowed to flatten them down. And Rashi explains what this means is shegoylin al karkas a tanner h godel ogle stuffing. It sounds like a big heavy rolling pin, like a mini steamroller that you would roll on the bottom of the oven to seal up any cracks. Biyad of a regal, you're allowed to do it with your hand or with your foot, which the Gemara is going to ask in a second. If we just said you're allowed to use the keli of a magila, so why is the Mishnah need to tell us that you can use your hand and foot? You're not allowed to use a special type of tool, and this tool was like it was a compression type of tool. If you ever noticed, whenever they put gravel down before they put the final surface on, they have this machine that compresses it. So the mechaltzayim was the hand version of that. It was basically a stick with a flat piece at the bottom that you would pound down to compress the soil or whatever it is that's there. Hatzir, the tzir is, in those days, their doors were built like we have in Lego, which means they weren't regular hinges like we have. Rather, there's a little pin coming out the bottom of the door that went into a hole in the doorpost. And that little pin that came out the bottom of the door was called a tzir. The tzinor is the socket at the top and the bottom that pin went into. V'hakoira. Koira is the doorpost, the upper doorpost. The haminoil and the lock, the maftech and the key. All of these items, shenishbru, if they broke on Yom Tov, and you need to fix them because you need to have security. You can't have your house unprotected, unless, of course, you're liberal, because then it's open door policy. Then, misaklim b'moed avada, you're allowed to fix them on chalamoid. Ubilvad shlo yischaven lachos malach b'moed. You shouldn't leave these tasks b'davke to be done on chalamoid. The whole kavation sheyochal lechel mehen b'moed. Pickling is also. You're heavily salting something. Pickling is also to be done on chalamoid, unless it's something that will be able to be eaten on chalamoid. So if it could be eaten on chalamoid, then if it could be eaten on Yom Tov, if it could be eaten before the Yom Tov, so it's tzarech Yom Tov, then you'd be allowed to engage in the pickling process. Zok the Gemara. Hechidami ma'aseh hedit. What is a building a wall? Ma'aseh hedit. And we had this earlier as well. We had it building your fence around your gina. Again, you have dafna are like small posts of wood. The hutza is palm leaves that you weave in between the posts, so it creates a temporary partition. The masnizatana tsar b'tzor, you can pile up rocks, but you don't cement them together, so it creates you like a rock barrier. I'm happy that we have a doctor here this morning because we're going to be discussing some medical issues. Shavan as a stocking, you're allowed to schmear the cracks in your oven, umagila noisan, b'magila, and you're allowed to flatten them out. You said you're allowed to use a tool that's made to compress the soil underneath the oven. So do I need the mission to tell me that you're also allowed to do it by hand, which is not the conventional way? You're not allowed to use any tool at all. But what it means is but you're allowed to flatten it out so well, but of course you have to do it by hand. But you're allowed to do such a good job that it would appear that it was done with a professional tool. But you're not allowed to do it with a professional tool. So you're allowed to do a completely professional job by hand, even though it would look like you did it with a tool. The finished product would look like you did it with a tool. Because someone can get right through it. Well, they say locks are made for honest people. Because a robber can get in anyway. That's right. Which is a pile of stones. Well, someone who could lug all those stones away can get right through. No, this wall is not a mic to protect someone from falling off a roof. This is a security fence around your house. Hatzir, Vatziner, Vakar, Vamino, Vamaftech. These are all parts of a doorway. Shenishbru, Misaklim, B'moid. You're allowed to call a locksmith on Chalamoid. Or a mini Gemara. How could you call a locksmith on Chalamoid? There's banging involved, there's noise involved, there's process involved. Or many Ad Yamav until the days of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Hayapatish Makib Yerushalayim. On Chalamoid, there was no restriction against banging with a hammer, like a blacksmith doing his work in Yerushalayim. But afterwards, he said no more. Which means ad yamav in mikan ve'lechloi. So how could our Mishnah allow this type of work, which involves banging when you're rebuilding your door lock or your other parts of your door? Now that we're post Rabbi Yochanan, it should no longer be allowed. What did Rabbi Yochanan outlaw? Blacksmithing work. So it's metal work where there's banging on an anvil. There's lots of noise involved. But Kamba the Nagri, we're speaking about carpentry. Sure, carpentry has some bangs, you're knocking nails in, but it's hardly the same level of noise that a napki, that a smith does.
Do you know why up until Rabbi Yochanan was allowed and why he disallowed it?
Probably because he saw people were less nizar in Chalamoid, so he wanted to restrict it.
So the days of the Nevi'im and all of that, they allowed the black.
Well, in the Gemara we had the Muksa, right? As Chazal saw that even were less Nizar and Shabbos, they made more restrictions. And I think the Gemara even says that later on people became Nizar again, so they relaxed restrictions. I remember we learned in Shabbos. Maskav lo Rab Chisda. So Rab Chisda asked, I don't understand. Yomru Kala Rabba Osir Kala Zuta Shari. So there are those who learn Shadis. It says there was no noise of patish at all, not loud, not low. But there's others who learn that whenever you say only a loud noise is not allowed, but a soft noise is allowed, everybody's going to make the noise that he wants. They'll say my noise isn't allowed, the enemy's noise is allowed. So then you've basically been mevatel the whole rule. It depends what you're doing with the wood. If you're banging in the wood, meaning you're chopping wood with an axe, that's noisy. That would not be allowed. When the Ar Mishnah says you're allowed to do work on a lock, you're not using an axe, you're using a magel, using a saw. A saw doesn't create the type of noise that an axe does. And therefore, an Ar Mishnah, it would be allowed, and it's not contravening the takana made by Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Papa has simpler terms. Kan kodim gzeir, kan lacher gzeir. Who said our Mishnah is after the days of Rabbi Yochanan? Maybe our Mishnah is telling you Allah even before the days of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Ashi Amar Har Rabbi Yehuda Har Rabbi Yosy. Now this is going to be an important Rabbi Yosy. One is Rabbi Yehuda, one is Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Yosy has a huge kula when it comes to Chalamoid. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Avdimai Man Tana Shinu b'Moyed b'Davar Ovid. Who says that if you're doing a Davar Ovid on Chalamoid, so there are those who learn that even though you're allowed to do it because it's a Davar Ovid, but you still have to do it with a Shinui. Who is the Tana who holds you need to do it with a Shinui? I don't know. But what I do know is the like Rabbi Yosy. I definitely know it's not like Rabbi Yosy, because Rabbi Yosy holds you're allowed to do a Davar Ovid even without a Shinui. So he's Mekel. And if we look in Rashi, Har Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yosy, B'Pirkei L'Kamon, I'm 4 lines up from the skinny lines in Rashi. B'Pirkei L'Kamon, Rabbi Yosy loy boy l'shnui l'Davar Ovid. Rabbi Yosy holds you don't need to make a shinui when you're doing a davar ovid, which is allowed on Chalamoid. The Shari Hacha Kol Hani below Shinu Rabbi Yosy. The Mishnah here that's allowing all these things is going according to Rabbi Yosy. It's a single davar ovid. You have your security breached in your house, and you need to fix it. Rabbi Yosy holds you can fix it without any type of shinu. He's mekel. That means he would, I guess, argue on Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Ravina Keman Madlina Neidna Kiv Yusa Dadasha B'Chayil Domoid. According to who? You're allowed to fix. Rashi explains exactly what this condition is. You have a beam that goes over the doorway, and if it had wooden nails, wooden pegs to fasten it, like dowels to fasten it into place, what if those loosen up? They fall out on Yom Tov. According to who are you allowed to put them back properly? Rabbi Yosy, because Rabbi Yosy allows you to fix over with any type of sheet.
The fact that he does it without a shinoi is important for a davar ovid, because as soon as a locksmith is told that he has to do it with the shinoi, he's going to charge more. So that's the davar ovid as well.
And then he's going to have to come back and fix it after Yom Tov again. Very good. Also, I forgot to mention. So you were telling us yesterday that paying rent in a store is also davar ovid.
I'm asking.
Right. So you asked me. So yesterday, like I mentioned earlier, yesterday with places it sounded very chumradik like Hilchos davar ovid. But the poskim are much more mekel than Tosfos. I spoke out of Rav Moshe, who holds that if you come to a city and there's something that you could buy there that you can't buy back in Lakewood, the chocolate shard, you can't buy that in Lakewood. You can only buy that in Toronto. So that you're allowed to buy on Yom Tov. So there's a lot of coolest. So don't assume everything's us, or you have to ask the Rav. Zok to Gemara. If you want to pickle something, normally you're not allowed to pickle something on Chalamoid because you're not going to be able to use it on Yom Tov. But if you will be able to use it on Yom Tov, then you're allowed to pickle it. Zoktimar Badisa Levoi Kavri. What happened was that there was a river there, and the river dried up, and suddenly there was a whole bunch of fish that were jumping around without water that were there for the picking. So it was very easy to catch. That day, everybody came home with a fish because he didn't even need bait. It was waiting for him. So everyone went and grabbed fish. Azel Kula Alma Tzoid. Cover. They went and captured fish. They didn't really tzoid because they were pre-captured. The water dried up on them, and suddenly they had a whole bunch of fish. So everyone went and took a whole bunch of fish. The question is, they took this fish, and they're not all going to eat it on Yom Tov, so they need to preserve it. So they asked Rabba, are we allowed to preserve this fish, even though we're going to be using it after Yom Tov? He allowed them to salt it and to preserve it. So Abaye told Rabba, how could you allow this oil to salt this fish and preserve the fish, but non-kavashin show but if you can't eat it on Chalamoid, you're not going to be able to, and since you're salting it, it won't be edible on Yom Tov. Since you're being mated up to salt it and it won't be edible on Yom Tov, how could you allow it? Amarlei, Rabba said, I'll explain to you why I was making. They originally ran and they grabbed all this fish because there was a windfall. They thought they were going to eat it. Now they have it and they realize, you know what? Fish for breakfast, fish for lunch, fish for supper, fish for snack, fish for main course, fish for the first spice, fish for the soup, fish for dessert. Maybe not, right? So now they're stuck with it. So therefore, vishavaklu pasti, and if they let it stay there, it's going to go bad, and then they lost all the fish. Kiprakmatya ha'ovid dami. I look at it like they have a product that's going to go bad, and it's a davar of the shari. But I would never ever allow them to go capture all that fish. Now that they took the fish, they didn't ask me. They were smart. They didn't ask until they already had the fish. Had they asked me, I would have said, no, take what you need. But I used it. Now they have it. Now it's kiprakmatya. But the Igad army are much bigger kula. Sharu l'rava meitad mezel aitumimlach. They asked him before they went, can we go capture the fish? So he says, yes, go take as much as you want, and you can preserve as much as you want. So that's a much bigger kula. On that, Omali Abaye, Vanan, Kveshin, Shoyachal Lechomen, Kaivshan, and these surely, not only did you allow them to be taken, but you're also allowing them to be pickled, which seems to be inconsistent with the Psak of our Mishnah. Tanan, Kaivshan Tanan, I'm sorry. Amar Lei, Rabba answered back, it's even fish that are salted for preservation. They're not edible as is. But if you had guests, how do you be able to use it? Too salty. You could wipe off the salt, squeeze out the salty juice inside them, soak it in water, squeeze it out again, and you can keep on squeezing it out until it becomes edible. There's actually a story with Shmuel himself. He once came and they wanted to serve him fish that was in a preserved state, it was all salted. And in order to make it edible, they actually soaked it and squeezed it out 60 times until they extracted enough of the salt that it became edible. So you see, it's possible, it might be involved, but it's possible to prepare and make this salted food edible even on Yom Tov, and therefore Rabba said, I allow.
You remember this Gemara? I remember this Gemara somewhere.
I don't.
No?
That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. If it's more than 2 days ago, I don't remember the Gemara. Rabba ikla levei reish kalusa. Rabba once found himself at the house of the reish kalusa. Avdulei, they made him shitin itzitzi v'achal. They made him this dish that was salted that they then squeezed out 60 times to make it edible, and he ate it. Ravi kloy levei Rav Shapir. He came to the house of Rav Shapir. Rav Shapir. Aisul kamayu. They brought to him a very interesting exotic dish. A hukavra fish. Tilsa bishula. 1/3 of it was cooked. Tilsa milcha. 1/3 of it was salted, and of course the salted part they had to eat the same way with shishim itzitzi until satavia. And 1/3 of it was roasted. Imagine what an exotic dish. Oh, gewaltig. This fish was so delicious, it almost came up. The reason why they served this fish, and because they couldn't get the ultimate. The ultimate would have been Harry's herring. But I used it, that wasn't available, so as a second best, they served him this exotic dish. So Amar Rav. So this is a very interesting Gemara. Every day. That's right, I remember that. That's right. That's right. Amar Rav, Amar Li Adad Tzaida. Adad Tzaida, he was the fish, Adad, this fisherman used to tell me, Gavra, when is the best time to eat fish? Zok Gemara, Gavra, Samach Lemisrachei Maili. Right before it goes bad, that's when it tastes the best. Don't eat it as soon as you catch it. Leave it a little bit. It's a little bit better. So all those ladies who come to the fish store and say, I don't want from the counter, bring me from the back. I want fresh from the back. That not necessarily is true. Sometimes it's better if you take something that's not brand new. So there's a beautiful, beautiful Tosfos on this. Because and here we need the doctor's help. Cover samach lemisrachei maili. It was manazeh zok Tosfos. Toivsin sakana lemechal samach l'sirchain. Eating fish right before it's about to go bad is dangerous. You're eating almost rotten food, so it doesn't stim at all with our Gemara. The gam, and this is a very yesodistic Tosfos that you're going to see is quoted everywhere. The gam mishti Allah avua damer besamach. The Gemara in a second is going to say that what you're supposed to learn, what you're supposed to drink with fish, the mali, that it's good, it's very dangerous. You're supposed to drink water with fish. It's very bad for you if you drink water with fish. So Tosfos is asking, the Gemara is prescribing something to do as a best practice, and Tosfos says that's lethal. Zok Tosfos, and this is a big yisoid in Tosfos. The Shema nishtanu k'moy harafua shabashas. Chaim Tzvi told us a shtickle Vilna Goyen and Rambam about this. The Shema nishtanu k'moy harafua shabashas. Maybe the Metzias changed as well, just like by Rafus and Shas. She'einon Tosfos b'zmanazeh. Many of the refuahs mentioned in the Gemara are really not good nowadays. So Tosfos is suggesting that maybe it's Nishtana Teva. It's this Tosfos that's used for many, many different things. Like for instance, the Beis Yosef says that you're not supposed to eat fish with milk. He doesn't bring it down in Shulchan Aruch, but he says it in the Beis Yosef. And the Tas holds that it's a printing mistake in the Beis Yosef. There's a big shaila. If you're allowed to eat fish with milchiks, because the Gemara talks about it, but the question is maybe it's Nishtana Teva. There's a lot of issues like that. There's a halacha that on the third day Yom Shlishi L'Mila you have to bathe the child in hot water because it's a kos nefashos. We don't do that anymore. So there's a lot of such halachas that there's a shal of fish and milk. I think the Shulchan Aruch brings that fish and milk is aser. Now I'm making a mistake. Fish and milk, I believe, is aser. The Rambam doesn't bring that down. Or maybe it's the opposite, but there's a lot of machlokes about these things, and it's all based on whether you say that nishtana hateva. And whenever the Posh can bring out this concept of nishtana hateva, it's this Tosfos that they quote. Maybe nowadays things are different, or maybe there's a different difference of Tosfos. Hashem and Naharis the Bavel Malalo Tvei. Maybe the rivers of Bavel where these fish were, maybe things were different. Maybe the Metzias are different. The Yesh Mefoshim, the Gavra. It's not talking about all fish. It's v'shem dag sheshmoi kavra umishuna b'dvar me'el mishar dagim. Maybe it's not nishtana teva. This particular fish maybe was best right before it went bad, but all other fish is not that way. So you don't have to nishtana teva. You could say it's only this type of fish. Because I'm in Perikal. Also on Gerusa, Sharil on Lishna. Gerusa was also, I'm not sure what that is, but Lashon is mutter. Sharil on Lishna the kavra. So you see that different things taste differently, and whatever the Rebbe Shem asks us to eat, there's things that are mutter for us to eat that have a similar taste. Pashas, not everything tastes the same. So Tosfos says either it's nishtana teva, or it could be things are different. Gewaltig.
So the women are right to come into the fish store and ask them.
So the women might be right. Yeah, the women are right at the end of the day. Nowadays, that's right. That's right.
In terms of over collecting enough for one before you but also go ahead and 20 fish obviously not going to be therefore something preserve something on it.
That's right.
And then you bring it back to while you go to a merchant and buy something that's not going to be require the preparation of the work that's going to be involved in preserving this for after.
I hear. Very nice. So it all comes together. It's like a stringer with all the fish coming together. Yeah.
Therefore, we're talking about how much to exploit.
I hear.
So it comes back again to the point that can you over-collect because you're going to create
Spoilage. That you're then going to have to salt because of it. I hear. And that was a shiloh of Rabba in the second shot. That's exactly what happened. So I think a Sfardi here wrote that his meaning is not to eat milk and cheese. Because I think the Rambam says you shouldn't, but the Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring it together. Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring milk, fish and dairy. The Shulchan Aruch does not bring fish and dairy. The Rambam does. So then there's a shaila: is there a different guf for a Sfardi because the Rambam's psak or not? That's also a good shaila. But we know the famous story of the Chazon Ish, right? Someone came to ask the Chazon Ish about a surgery that was needed. The Chazon Ish says, do the surgery, but do it in America, do it in Chutz La'aretz, do not do the surgery in Israel. So that's why. He said, because there's a machlokes Yerushalmi and Bavli, and Yerushalmi holds that the condition you have makes you a treifa. And the Bavli holds it doesn't make you a treifa. So if you do the surgery Chutz La'aretz, then you're not a treifa, you'll survive. But if you do it in Israel, you're a treifa, you won't survive. So you see how somehow the psak halacha impacts the reality. Okay, let's see the Heilige Gemara weiter. So now that we got the halachas of fishing on Chalamoid, we can go weiter. Now we learn a little bit about things that are good. So the last thing we learned was that fish right before it gets spoiled is good, and Tosfos has a whole shaila about that. Rav said, Omar li adotzaida. Once again, adotzaida, he knew his fish. Gavra tavya, the best way to eat fish is have roasted fish, ba'achua, with its brother. What do you mean with its brother? What comes from the ocean along with fish? Salt. So therefore, you should have roasted fish that's salted. That's a good dish to eat. So clearly he's speaking not about freshwater fish. He's speaking about saltwater fish. Asuke bavua, and you should eat it with its father, meaning so after you roast the fish with salt, then put it into cold water, which is the father of the fish and the father of the salt, because the water of the ocean is what produces the fish and the salt, so to speak. And then mechle beberei, and eat it with its child. The tzir, the juice that comes out of the fish, is what you should eat the fish with. And what you should drink, ashtia lavu, and drink water with it. And Rav also said, among the other side, kavra, which is a fish, tachli is a cress, it's a type of vegetable. The chalba and milk, when you eat those, litten gufa, you should do exercise right afterwards. I think kavra tachli chalba spells shalom. Right after you eat it, the litten gufa, you should never go right away to take a nap. You should first do exercise. V'loy litten purya, and don't overload your bed with the new package that you have inside your intestines after you ate these things. Kavra, tachli v'chalba, fish and cress and milk. If you eat these things, and this is where they discuss if you're allowed to have fish with milk together, it's talking about eating all these things, you should drink it with maya v'lo shichra. Don't drink beer with it, drink water with it. But if you're going to drink beer with it, at least don't drink wine, because wine is even more. Shichra v'lo chama. Now we're going to get into more halachas of Dover Ha'avad. So we're going to get Aleph on the page. Let me see if I can find it. Over here we go. Beautiful. Zok Gemara. The process of making oil. The process of making oil was they don't just take olives and dump them into the press. They would first put them into some type of container and turn them over and let them stew in themselves, soften them up, and it induced a better extraction of oil. So, if someone already has his olives in this vat and they're turned over, meaning if we don't press them right away and they stay in this mash, not a mash, they stay in this softened state, they're all going to go bad. So now he has a crisis on his hand. He has a dover oven, and Loyalenu, he lost a korib, which now makes him an oval. He's in Shiva. He's not allowed to do malacha then. Or some other problem that prevented him from being able to process it, and it's right before Yom Tov. He had hired workers to do this process for him, and they didn't show up on the job. They didn't show up. They figured, why should I show up? I can get served. I get paid more from the government than work. So why should I come to work? So they didn't show up. So now he has a crisis on his hand. And the question is, it's Chalamoid now. What is he supposed to do? So they didn't show up right. He had really planned to do it before Yom Tov, and now he's stuck because of something that was out of his control, and now he's going to lose all of his olives. So the Allah is Toyin Kayer Rishon. The first heavy board that they would put on it, which would be the first level of pressing, that you're allowed to do on Chalamoid, even though you normally wouldn't be able to, because at least that will take some oil out, and that will relieve the crisis. There'll no longer be a risk of the system of the olives getting ruined. I guess once you do that first press, even though you don't complete the whole process, it salvages your olives. And then you leave it until after Yom Tov. You could do the whole process. Zoyleif, the goymer, the guf kedarkei. Zoyleif means you can do the full pressing, and the goymer means you can finish it. The guf, you can even put it into barrels and seal the barrels. Kedarkei. You can do the full process on Yom Tov. So the first thing we have to focus on is the Mishnah seems to have a little bit of ADHD, because the Mishnah starts off, someone already was hyper chazaysav and he became an oval, and then the Mishnah doesn't tell us what the loch is. the Mishnah just skips on to discussing whether or not you're allowed to do it in Chol Hamoed. Well, what about a novel? So, Frek the Gemara, Pasach ba'aval, b'sayim b'moed. What happened to Aval? Amar Abshisha b'rei Ravidi, Zoy say Meres, Devarim hamotarim b'moed, asurim b'mei avloi. You see from here that one of the reasons why he couldn't do it was because he was a novel, but it's Agaret an oval can't do it. And the oval was just another example of something that caused that, although he was prepared, he did his due diligence, he wasn't able to do it. But it's Agaret, it's not even a question, you for sure can't do it b'mei avloi. And the Mefarshim told us, you know why? Because b'mei avloi, you're only usher. Everybody around you could do it for you. But on Chol Hamoed, nobody could do it. So that's why there's a kula on Chol Hamoed. Rav Ashi Amar, no, let me buy a kamar. We're actually discussing that you're allowed to do this, even when you're a novel. And what the Tana means to say, "Lo mi boy b'mei avloi dimidei rabbanan," forget avelos. With the issue melachas midei rabbanan, v'shari there for sure it's mutter. Elafilu b'moed isu melacha midei raisa. But even on Chol Hamoed, with isu melacha shtams midei raisa, we learn it from Sukkim. The Makam say they show Rabbanan, and we learned at the beginning of the Masechta, the Rabbanan can't overrule the Raisa, but it was given to them to decide which malachas are usher and which are not mutter. Tanikamas Rab Shisha b'rei Davidi. Elu devarim ha'oisin le'evel b'mei evloi. These are the things that you could do for a novel while he's a novel. Zeisav afuchen, if he had already prepared the olives and now it's going to be an oven for him if he can't press them. Te'anin lo, you could do it for him. What if he has a jug full of product, but it has to be sealed? It's going to go bad if it's not sealed. He has his flax that's soaking in whatever it's soaking in, that's part of its process, that if you don't take it out, it's going to be ovid. The or the wool that has to come out of the dye. You're allowed to even water his field when it's his turn to irrigate. Rashi says they used to take turns irrigating their fields from the main water supply that came from the city. If his day is there and he's a novel, you irrigate his field for him. If he has a plowed field ready to be planted, and it's a dover of it, if you don't plant it now, it'll lose opportunity. You can even plant that field for him. The sada haimedes l'pishtan, and a field that's going to be for pishtan. You're also allowed to plow for him. Rashi says, if you don't plant now, you won't be able to plant pishtan there, and that was a valuable product that they wanted to plant. Amrullah, they told him, what's the big deal? Why do you let him plant the field or plant pishtan? So it's a plowed field. So if he won't plow it today, he'll plow it in a week, so his wheat will grow a week later. Me'echatei says you have to do that. Or okay, he can't plant, if he doesn't plant pishtan right away, he can't plant pishtan. So plant something else. That's not a reason to be matter to do it. What if his zaysim are turned over? And they can't find somebody else to do it. Till now we're saying you get somebody else to do it. What if there's nobody else? Or kadei logo if ain't sham umin elahu, pishtani lahalas min amishra, bitzimri lahalas min ayoyra, ve'ain sham umin elahu, hareza yasa bitzina. He's allowed to do it himself, but bitzina nobody should see. Yes, Yalkein Amar Abshim Gamliel. Im hay umun l'rabbim. What if this person who's a novel is an umin to do something that the rabbim needs, that he's the only person who could do it? The Sapar, he's the only barber in the city. Ubalon, he's the only person who could work in the bathhouse. L'rabbim. The mikveh is going to shut down if we don't have him running the mikveh, or no one's going to be able to get haircuts. So the halach is hareza yasa. He's even allowed to do it for the public because he's needed for the tzorech harabim. Harisin, v'chakirin, v'kablonim. An oris is someone who doesn't own property, so he makes a deal with a property owner. I will work your field. I'll do all the work, and I get 25%. And I'll give you 25% of the product, or I get 25% of the product. I think he gets 25%. Of course, the Balabais in the field gets most of it. He gets 25% of the product. Or Hakirin, I will work your field for you, and I will give you X bushels of whatever it is we're planting. Or Kablonim, I will plant your field for you, and you will pay me X dollars to do it. Hare elu yasu acher mishvila. What he'll do, he'll have to get a subcontractor to do the work for him. Hachamorim hagamal basapan. What if you're a donkey driver, or a camel driver, or a shipper, and only you could do it, or you've already contracted with them? Hare elu lo yasu. So if you have one of these types of companies, you're not allowed to contract with somebody to do work when you're a novel, or you're not. If you're a novel, you're not allowed to contract to do work with somebody. However, but if you're already in a contract, then then you're allowed to do it. What if you just have a daily job? Even if it's in a different city where there's no Marasayan because nobody knows you're an Abul in a different city, lo yasa, you're not allowed to do any work. Why can't you do any work? Rashi tells us, because the Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us that a schir yoim is allowed to cancel his contract midday. So he has no achrayus to them. And it's not a great loss to the owner because it was only a schir yoim. Anyway, it was casual work. What if he's a shoemaker and he has people's shoes in his house? Even though it's really his business because he charged them at a fixed rate, he's not being paid by the hour. Lo yasa, he's not allowed to do it. That makes no sense. Are you telling me that it's a chiddush that even though it's a contract work, he's not allowed to, but it's pashut that he's not allowed to do it if he's paid by the hour? Rabba, it's more logical to say he's not allowed to do it if it's a contract work. It's more logical to say that he could do it if it's daily work. He's not allowed to do any work in his home, whether it's contract work, whether it's paid by the hour. What if someone was supposed to do work? Someone was supposed to work on him. He had a contractor working by him. So the law is beveisoy lo yasu beveis achar yasu. So if you have someone who's doing work by you, you're not allowed to have him do that work when you're a novel. But if you have your shoes by a shoemaker, he's allowed to work on your shoes while you're a novel. Marion Barei de Ravin, Umar Barei de Ravacha, Barei de Rava, Havalahu Gamlo the Tur Bahadadavi. They shared a pair of oxen. They each had one ox, and one ox alone can't plow. You need two together. So they shared it. And one day our oxen worked by him, and one day they worked by me. But we both relied on each other. Yisroy b'milsa b'mar Barei de Ravacha, Barei de Rava. Mar Barei de Ravacha, Barei de Rava, Nebuch had an avelus. He became a novel. So he pulled his animal out. He pulled his animal out of the group. But that means it's causing a loss to his partner. So the halacha is Amar Rabashi. Rabashi said, Gavra Rabba, Kamar Barei de Ravacha, Ovid Hachi, you would do something like that? I understand. The halacha is once it's muchkorinich lacherim, you're allowed to leave it there. So I understand for yourself, if you want to be from, you don't want to do malacha even though you'd be allowed to. But are you not worried about your partner Miriam? Now he's going to lose too because you pulled out. That's not fair.
You're a Gavra Rabba, and the Gavra Rabba is always worried about other people.
Vatanya, we learned. Okay, very good. Oh, that's like the Rav said. That's a Gavra Rabba. Oh, Gavaltic. Vatanya, why did Mar Barei de Ravacha Barei de Rava stop? Why the Hava also the day Why? Because people will see and they'll learn from him. So there's a shaila la alocha. Does he have to pay the guy his losses? Since be'etzem you could have done it. So now that you're pulling out, you got to pay me for my losses. Or maybe an adam choshev is taka mechuyev not to, and therefore he doesn't have to pay for his losses. So there is such a shaila.
And that's why he changed it to the other, because even though I'm a Gavra Rabba, I'm also
another choshev. Because that's why I didn't use the word Gavra Rabba here. He's the other choshev. Very nice. Okay, beautiful. So let's stop over here. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Your bunch should help that just like that city, all of a sudden there's a windfall of tons of fish. We should have a windfall of all good things that we need. Yes. Without any work. They had a windfall of fish without fishing. Can you imagine they won the 649 without buying a ticket? We should always to win the 649 in our lives, whether it's in Parnasa, whether it's in Nachas, whether it's in Gesund, whether it's in Shidduchim,